or Aries rising and or moon sign for July 2023. Aries, your ruler Mars is moving into Leo during the beginning of July. This is quite a volatile transit initially, especially because Mars moves over this juncture between Cancer and Leo. And the junctures between water and fire in Vedic astrology are seen as these kinds of voids. So your ruling planet moving through this void, there might be a sense of, not being very clear initially. However, once Mars gets into Leo in July and in August, it will be in a much stronger position than it's been of late, because Mars, your ruler, has been in Cancer, in debilitation, so very weak. And you might have been feeling that, Aries, especially if it's your rising sign, but also moon sign, this sense of not being very clear about your direction and what you're doing and how you're feeling might be, agitated, at least a bit frustrated. But now that Mars is going into Leo, into a fiery domain of Leo, and the fifth sign, it's a lot more expressive, a lot more creative, a lot more determined in making plans for the future. The only caveat is that Mars is now opposing Saturn in your 11th house sign, which is currently retrograde. And so your bigger ambitions, your long-term goals and objectives in your career and anything you have to do might really bring some sort of pushback against any kind of immediate gratification or a need to express yourself in the more immediate time frame. So you have to obviously be mindful of this balance that now is possible, but is absolutely necessary, between Mars, the, in the moment, I want to do this and I want it done like yesterday, versus your long-term objectives and thinking about the consequences of anything that you're doing. So as long as you're on board with that and you're very focused and deliberate in whatever you do, these transits can be really powerful for you, Aries, and especially because Mars, your ruler, is coming out of its weakness and into a stronger position. It's also been aspected now by Rahu, the north node of the moon, which is still moving through your sign. So Rahu in your sign aspecting Mars, your ruler, in your fifth sign, it's just a lot more expressive and creative. Now, of course, you have to be mindful of any issues in relationships that are suggested here in terms of fifth house. So that's, for example, children, if you have any, but also lovers, any kind of romantic start. I would caution some things here because of Mars here, but also Venus. So Venus is about to move into your fifth house sign also, but unlike Mars, which continues to move forward, Venus will station by the 23rd of July. So it will station and then go retrograde from July 23rd until September 4th, and it will actually back up into Cancer in August and disappear. While it's combust, we won't be able to see Venus. So obviously your relationships are going to go through a lot of changes in July, Aries, because this is your seventh lord, your second lord, family, relationships, fifth lord, children, lovers, and then the 11th house, friends. So all of your relationships basically are impacted in an enormous way in July, where you're going to obviously have to go through a lot of negotiation. You're going to have to consider a lot of different things. And with Venus going retrograde from the end of July, really not to rush into anything, I would say, and not make any decisions about your relationships or about your finances at this time. So that's the general, rule of thumb anyway for Venus retrograde. But for you, Aries, this is absolutely a must, not to make any major decisions financially or romantically or in any relationships or any kind of romantic relationships and or business relationships. So let me go back to a few days before Venus stations or before Venus goes into Leo, because we have the full moon in Sagittarius, and this is going to really activate all of the fiery signs. So Aries, your rising sign, your fifth sign, Leo, and your ninth sign, Sagittarius, for the full moon on the 3rd. And so this is inspirational, I would say. I think there's a lot of impetus to move, plan, do something, express yourself, feel more optimistic, especially after the beginning of the month where the moon is debilitated in Scorpio and Mars, your ruler, is in this juncture. The first few days might feel a bit uncertain and shaky, but then for the full moon, I think there's great potential here. So that's the full moon. Let's get to the new moon then as well, because we have a new moon then on the 17th. So the sun moves into your 4th sign. So it's been transiting through your third sign the first couple of weeks of July. And that's great in many ways in terms of, again, creative self-expression. So all of that's wonderful. The sun then moves into Cancer by mid-month into your fourth host sign, where Venus will return later on in August as well. So that obviously is a lot of emphasis now, and for this upcoming lunar month from July 17th on the fourth house, which is all about your home. So again, it's a very personal thing, even though you have to find balance between your personal life, your private life, and your public life, work, and all of that. There's a lot of emphasis on private life, on the home, and your happiness. And, if your mother is alive, then also on that relationship. But whatever or whoever it is, it's a very private, very internal thing also, with Venus subsequently moving retrograde. So this new moon on the 17th is a time to think about what makes you happy, thinking about your home life, thinking about maybe things that have to be adjusted in your home life, especially now that the sun is in your fourth, opposite Pluto in your 10th, with the nodes continuing to transit through your first and seventh. All of the pivotal key areas of your chart and your life are being impacted by big changes that are happening, but are probably not at all obvious, because Pluto and the nodes are not at all obvious. So home, relationships, career, and your sense of self and what you're doing and your direction in life, all of these things are really in a jumble, I would say, in July. But that has to be seen as a good thing for you, Aries, that these changes are absolutely necessary. And as long as you make the adjustments and find the balance between the work-life balance and all of that, and in your relationships, and take a pause, I would say, and work things out with your partner or any other significant person in your life, without coming to any kind of definitive answer or decision until it starts to move forward again, when Venus stations in September. So I'll talk more about Venus retrograde, of course, next month in August, because it will also be combust, not visible, in Cancer, in your fourth sign. So obviously relationships are going to go through a lot of review and reassessment, and really to be mindful of that in August, especially before September things start to move on. I hope that's been helpful for you, Aries. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Taurus rising and or moon sign for July 2023. So Taurus, Venus, your ruler, is about to go into its retrograde transit by the end of July. This is an important time for sure in terms of your own personal expression and your home life and what makes you happy and who makes you happy and how you can go about finding happiness. Because Venus also rules your sixth sign, and it's about the things, the steps that you have to put in place to make yourself happy, to be happy with your home. It's the setup at home, your relationship with your mother, if she's still alive. Your relationship with your siblings also might go into a review, but also in your engagements with anyone, anywhere, and in terms of traveling about and connecting with people, and especially siblings, like I said, but also neighbors. So Venus begins the month in your third sign of traveling about and connecting with people and communicating and traveling and all of that. Then it goes into Leo a few days later after the full moon on the 3rd, and it will slow down in Leo, and by the July 23rd, it will station retrograde. So Mars, of course, is already moving into Leo, and so therefore, there is a lot of emphasis on your home life and your home in particular right now, with the sun moving through your second host sign, and by mid-month moving into your third sign, where Venus will back up, and so Venus will become combust in August. There's such an emphasis on ending something in the home or clearing something out or finishing up something, because the third sign is the 12th from the 4th. And with the Venus retrograde from the 4th back to the 3rd and going back into the 4th again by October, there's going to be a lot of back and forth, obviously, in terms of starting something in the home. Now, if you're working on a project, a home project, that's something you can use. You can channel this energy, and there's a lot of energy here to do that in that project. So if, for example, if you're renovating, that you go over it again and again and you get it right. And you do need to be patient, though, because Mars is opposite Saturn while it's in your fourth house, with Venus stationing retrograde opposite Saturn. So Saturn is retrograde in your 10th house already. So there's a lot of things that you're having to reconsider in how you're doing things. And there might be some issue, like I said, with neighbors or with the home situation that you have to think again about, how am I doing this? How do I need to approach this? I might need to change my approach here. So there could be some frustration as well around the home dynamics. And so being mindful of that, whether it's personal relationships or actual physical home, bricks and mortar home. So want to mention the full moon on the 3rd. It's a full moon in Sagittarius in your 8th sign. And the other fiery signs, Aries and Leo, are very activated now with a lot of fiery energy and aspect between the North Node, Jupiter, Mars, Moon. It's all very fiery, but in areas of your life that are not very obvious or clear necessarily. 4th, 8th, and 12th house are called moksha houses, or houses of liberation in Vedic astrology. So it's very much about hidden aspects, private things, hidden things, potentially from even yourself. But at the same time, this full moon and these transits in general, I think, represent this kind of spark of inspiration as well, about how to overcome some issues, perhaps about clarity, ultimately, about letting go of some issue, about moving on. Because Mars is moving on. Whatever about Venus, your ruler, moving backwards from the end of the month, Mars is going to continue to move on and move on to, through a place of great strength in July and August in Leo. So there's definitely great potential here for you to move on and move through some blocks here and to find the inspiration. But again, just considering Venus is retrograde by the end of the month, we'll look at that here after the new moon, then it's just time to consider how you're approaching things, and especially the home life. Is there a way that you can negotiate in a different way? Maybe you have to compromise. Maybe there's some way you can find another way to negotiate, I would say. So the new moon is in Cancer in your 3rd sign. So it's very much about how are you communicating? How are you dealing with your neighbors, your siblings, your everyday life? How are you expressing yourself? How is your mind operating around these dynamics? Because the new moon in Cancer, your 3rd sign, is about drawing some conclusions here about some patterns that are repeating, and maybe just observing those and start thinking about new patterns and making a new intention for a new moon. The sun and moon are in your 3rd, but opposite Pluto in your 9th, with the nodes in a square in your 12th and 6th. So that, again, a lot of hidden things that you could bring up to your conscious awareness now that are possibly very hidden, because the nodes and Pluto are already hidden, but then they're already hidden in your 6th, 9th, and 12th houses, which are also hidden. So a lot of things to be unearthed, I imagine, at this time, whether that's literally, figuratively, whatever it might be, as you move through these changes that you're making happen in your home life, while finding a balance between your work and home life. So it's all about the work-life balance here with Mars and Saturn opposite. And so I hope that's been of help, Taurus. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Gemini rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Gemini, your ruler Mercury is in a very powerful position starting out the month. It's also moving quite quickly through your sign, though, so make the most of it. On the 1st of July, it's exactly conjunct the sun, so combust. And so this combustion highlights, obviously, the next phase of Mercury as it then starts to move ahead of the sun, where Mercury does this dance with the sun back and forth. It moves too far ahead of the sun at some point, and then it has to be snapped back into place and goes through a retrograde, which it will do later on in August. So in July, it's moving ahead. So therefore, you might be moving ahead with your plans in July. And you, of course, need to. That's what Mercury moving ahead of the sun is all about. And so for you, it's very much about a personal life, but it obviously impacts your relationships and your career as well, because these are opposing qualities. And of course, Gemini is always about this and that. It's always about weighing things up and having different options. And with Mercury in Gemini and the sun, there are lots of things to think about, a lot of options, a lot of choice. And it could be quite fun, very fun, but also very stimulating, I imagine. Mars has just moved into your 3rd sign out of its weakness in your 2nd sign. So whatever might have gone on in the last few weeks around family dynamics and finances and any kind of frustrations there, Mars is now moving into a better position. It's in the third sign, which is more conducive to Mars type activities. And it's in Leo, which is a lot more determined. It's a much better place to put Mars in the third house. So you might feel this energy, this spark of inspiration and determination to do something, to get out and to move about and to express yourself and to communicate with people. Just be mindful, I would say, of relationships like siblings and neighbors, that you don't sort of burn your bridges, I would say. Mars in the third in Leo could be maybe too heated, and you might get into an argument quite easily if that were indicated by other things. Now, having said that, Saturn is opposite Mars in your third house, now retrograde in your ninth house. So you're having to kind of think about the bigger picture anyway. So I don't think it's going to allow you to get too out of hand. So if that argument were to, ensue, that you kind of would consider the consequences, that you wouldn't want to burn your bridges with siblings or neighbors or whatever. But if you're having to deal with somebody, siblings or neighbors or anybody in your communications, and it's getting heated, maybe just be mindful of that. And yes, maybe something needs to be said, but at the same time, you don't want to make any enemies at this time. Because, of course, Mars is the sixth lord in your chart, as well as the 11th lord. So it's friends and enemies. It's a bit of a mix of both. And so friends can become enemies and enemies can become friends. And you have to think about all of these dynamics and how you're engaging and communicating and hopefully listening to other people, because that's another thing that the third house represents. It's not just about speaking, it's about listening. The third house ruler, Sun, is moving through your sign for the first couple of weeks. So that's also a very powerful indication of really in tuning with other people and, expressing yourself, as I said, and leading in some way and being an inspiration for other people as well. So that could be very powerful. Let me show you the full moon, which is in your seventh sign. It's definitely a culmination point. Every full moon is, but this one is a very fiery culmination with all of the more enjoyable houses, we might say. The 11th, the 3rd, and the 7th are all very activated. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. These are the fiery signs. So that, again, it's just adding more and more connections, communication, interaction, and relationships. So friends, lovers, friends of lovers, neighbors, siblings, all kinds of engagements with anybody, really, I would say, is very much stoked at this time. There's a lot of fiery energy going on here, and a full moon in your seventh sign. Absolutely a time to enjoy yourself and your relations, but just being mindful of that fiery nature maybe getting out of hand. That's the only thing to say about that. If we move it forward and we see that after the new moon, which is on the 17th, the new moon is in your second sign a few days before Venus stations retrograde, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The new moon in your second sign, Cancer, is all about family dynamics and finances. And speaking of finances, of course, Venus about to go retrograde back into your second sign where it is starting the month, obviously points to a need to, again, think about how you're communicating. But again, this is also about finances. So new moon in your second sign, I think a time to, maybe think about how you're engaging with other people, especially family members, thinking about how you speak, thinking about and thinking about what's important to you, thinking about your diet, maybe thinking about new patterns that you could initiate at this time, new intentions. And because Pluto is opposite this new moon on the 17th, and they're in a square to the nodes, the sun, moon, Pluto are squaring the nodes in Aries and Libra. Again, very much about relational houses, 5th and 11th, children and friends, or lovers and networks. So it's all of these houses are indicating engagement and interaction and relationships. So definitely a month to think about how you're engaging. And then once Venus stations retrograde on the 23rd, well, this is a time to, again, reconsider, because Venus is about hesitating when it's retrograde and possibly rethinking how you're approaching that relationship and how you communicate within that relationship dynamic. And as the sun moves into your second sign of speech, and Mercury has moved through there in the more emotive place where, you might have said something that came from you don't know where. It might not be a very rational thing, a rational feeling, but yet it's there. And so thinking about, how you're communicating to do so more effectively when you're, maybe not as emotional, but also to tune into your emotions and to articulate how you're feeling to someone, whether it's a family member or anyone else. And as Venus goes retrograde now and will begin in your third and go back into your second, again, this is very much about engaging and communicating and listening and speaking, and all of these things are going to have to be worked through now. And so Venus retrogrades are always the time to work a lot of these issues out in our relationships. And again, in finances, which is another big part of this. So I hope that's been of help, Gemini. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Cancer rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Cancer, Venus continues to move through your sign, finishing out in the first few days of July, with Mars just having moved into your second sign, having moved through your sign for the past few weeks. And so the Mars transit in particular would have been a challenge, because Mars, although it is seen as one of the better transits for you in many ways, because Mars is also debilitated in Cancer, there might have been a lot of frustration that you've had to experience, whether it's at the hands of your children, if you have any, or your creative endeavors, or just your future plans, or at work. All of these issues would have been highlighted because of Mars ruling the 5th and 10th houses in your chart. Now that Mars has moved on, apart from the first few days of July, which is a bit volatile and a bit of a blip, I think it's going to settle into a more structured, more determined, more focused energy in your second sign. So in terms of your work, in terms of finances, getting everything sorted, yes, there might be some limitations to have to deal with here, because Mars in your second is opposite Saturn in your eighth. So you're having to negotiate some sort of financial settlement here, maybe with your partner, perhaps, or with another entity. Some sort of balance that needs to be arrived at, some compromise as well, because Venus will actually move into your second sign as well. But unlike Mars, Venus will retrograde from the end of July. So Venus in your second sign from 23rd of July, stationing retrograde, going back into your sign in August before beginning to move forward again in September, and not moving back into your second sign until October. There's quite a lot to work out in the next few months, Cancer, in terms of your finances and how it's impacting you, as well as your family dynamics and your values. And all of these will impact your relationships in a big way, of course, because Venus and Mars in Leo oppose Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn is retrograde now in Aquarius. So there's definitely some relationship dynamics that have to be worked out, some negotiations that need to be addressed at this time. Let me go back to the third as we begin the month, because that's a full moon. And so obviously always important to look at the lunar phases, Cancer, as you're ruled by the moon. The full moon in your sixth sign with Jupiter aspecting in your 10th. Definitely a lot of work houses activated right now, and the very fiery houses. The 10th house is Aries, second is Leo, sixth is Sagittarius. They're all fire signs. It's a time to be really inspired to do something, and something more meaningful, I would say, especially around this full moon, maybe to kind of think about something that you're putting out there in the world, an idea, an ideal as well, perhaps, and how are you going to go about making that happen? Thinking about those kinds of themes for this full moon on the 3rd of July. So a couple of weeks later, we can look at the new moon then, which is in your sign on the 17th of July, just a few days before Venus stations retrograde. So this is a time to really, everything is going to pivot around this new moon on the 17th of July. Mars will be opposing Saturn. Venus will station retrograde a few days after. The new moon in your sign. There's a lot to work out here personally for yourself, professionally also, and in your relations, and how all that impacts you and how you present. So thinking about this new moon on the 17th of July, I would say it's a time to really think about how you're communicating also, and thinking about how you present yourself, even physically, if it's your rising sign, but whether or not it is, it could be your moon sign. It's about how you think. And new moons are always a time to kind of, set some intentions, for a new lunar month. And I think this new lunar month, like I said, is a real pivotal time, and a lot to balance out for sure. There's a lot of energy that wants to be released, but then is also kind of constrained or contained, at least with Saturn. And then Rahu in Aries, your 10th sign, as it moves away from Jupiter, aspecting Mars, your 10th lord, in your second sign, there's a lot of things that you probably want to say, that you want to do in your career, perhaps, that you just want to do in general, but you might have to consider the impact that that's having, the long-term implications because of Saturn. So a lot of things to think about professionally and in every which way in terms of anything that you're doing, I would say Cancer in the month of July. But once you figure it out, and once you understand there's a lot of compromise that is needed here and lots to find balance with, including negotiations financially or any other which way, I think there's a lot you can do with this. As I mentioned, a few days later on the 23rd, Venus will station retrograde and will eventually then go back into your sign in August and will be combust in your sign because the sun has just moved into your sign by mid-July. And so obviously this is a time of really considering your home life as well, how all of this is having an impact on your happiness and your objectives in life in general, your ambitions, how it's impacting your friends circles as well as your associations, and thinking about your family dynamics and your financial situation will be massive in the coming weeks from the end of July. So, you know, I would say, as I would say for all signs, to be really patient with these transits, to be mindful of the Venus retrograde not being the most conducive to making any definitive decisions about anything. It's just a time to reconsider, not to actually sign on the dotted line or make any decisions really. It's a time to be really mindful and patient. So Cancer, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Leo rising and or moon sign for July 2023. So Mars is just moved into your sign, Leo, and it is in a very powerful position. And so this is a great power, and you might feel the electricity of this and the energy return after Mars having transited through your 12th sign, where you just might not have felt in any way directed or clear about what you're doing or motivated in any way, or you might have overcompensated and pushed harder, but then felt depleted. Now you're feeling an energy return with Mars moving into your sign. So you might feel a sense of purpose and a sense of determination in doing something. Now, it could also be around just generally in your home life, because it's your 4th lord, and also travel plans, it's your 9th lord, or with your parents, mother and father, 4th and 9th house ruler in your 1st sign. So there's some dynamics you're having to deal with here. And one thing I would say about this is if you're already in a kind of argumentative stance with your parents, I would say this is probably not the best time to actually tackle that you don't want to burn any bridges at this time, that you want to try and keep a cool head. And of course, Saturn opposite Mars in your 7th sign, which is now retrograde, is going to keep a close eye on proceedings. So you're not going to be able to get away with any sort of impulsive, reactive kind of things right now. Saturn is going to remind you that you have to think about the consequences. And there are consequences here. So thinking about how you're engaging with other people in general, but especially your parents and your partner, and that you don't want to, you want to find balance between these things with Mars and Saturn opposing. Venus is about to move into your sign as well a few days after the full moon, which is on the 3rd of July. So the full moon, I'll talk about Venus in a minute, but the full moon is such an important trigger, I think, in the month. It's a volatile trigger in one way, like I said, so be mindful of your relations. But in another way, it's inspired because Mars is in your sign, Moon in your 5th sign, and Jupiter aspecting both Mars and Moon from your 9th sign. So it's inspired, and definitely the 1st, 5th, and 9th is all about feeling like you're doing something on purpose. Something feels more purposeful. But again, it's just overdoing that and then leading to an argument if somebody in any way challenges you or restricts you from doing something that you want. Now, again, I would say relationships, I'm thinking about also children here, because the full moon on the 3rd of July, there's a culmination point coming in here. But even if you don't have children, it's any kind of creative endeavor or even just making plans for your future. If anyone at all feels like they're impeding you, you might feel that kind of frustration, and that could lead to some argument. That's the full moon. I want to show you the Venus, which is about to station retrograde. It's moving into your sign. And it is going to be, very slow moving through your sign initially, and then appears to stop moving in your sign by the 23rd, and then will slowly backtrack through your sign into August, where it returns to your 12th sign. So there's a lot of things to compromise right now, Leo. And, you'll have to be really mindful of how you're communicating and what you're doing right now. If in a work environment, that's important around any kind of superiors, you need to be really mindful of how you're engaging with your superiors, bosses. But in general, in all things that you're doing, be really mindful, traveling about, all of these things. Venus is slowing down, so it's asking you to slow down and pay attention to what you're doing and how you're communicating. And hopefully would also smooth over the Mars rough edge and will allow you to communicate more effectively by being more receptive. That's what Venus likes to do. And eventually, like I said, in August, it will move back into your 12th sign. So there's something to compromise here and maybe even sacrifice for something that you want. And so you'll have to sacrifice something in August and negotiate. So there's a lot of negotiations that are about to be, instigated here from the end of July with Venus about to station retrograde. First of all, I want to show you the new moon, which is on the 17th. It's in your 12th sign. And because your ruler, the sun, on the 16th moves into your 12th sign, even though, astrologically it's said to be a strong place for the sun, it's in a friendly environment. For you, Leo, it's in the 12th sign. And so the sun in the 12th sign is, possibly not that clear. You might not be very clear about what you're doing, the direction your life is taking in general. Even if you feel more inspired in July, which there is that potential, you might not be clear about how you get there. You might not be clear about your role in this or who you are. That's the sun. And the sun for all of us is a sense of self and self-esteem and self-confidence. And so when it's in the 12th sign, you might be lacking that. You might have to sacrifice so much that you feel like you're losing out in some way, perhaps. So best to engage with this energy, as it does this every year between mid-July and mid-August anyway. Best, to engage with it in a more conscious way, that you're being deliberate and being a bit more sacrificial, shall we say, that something has to be given up. It's a good time for endings, for sure. This period from mid-July to mid-August, maybe there's something you can end in your life, some personal journey that you've been on that you can now finish up and be ready for the new journey as it takes hold by mid-August, because it is absolutely going to take hold. And as the sun moves into your sign in mid-August to mid-September, there's some new something coming into your life. But before then, try and think about this new moon as well, and the whole month from mid-July to mid-August as this kind of time to sacrifice something or end something or give something up. So the new moon on the 17th of August then is that kind of pivotal time really in the month and the year really as well, because the new moon opposite Pluto in a square to the nose in your 3rd and 9th signs, there's a lot that you have to consider here in terms of how you're engaging with other people and what inspires you and what you want, and versus what you need to give up to get what you want. And so a lot to consider here, and a lot that isn't very obvious at all with the nose and Pluto. So Leo, you might have to be really patient during this period, especially with Mars kind of fueling you and giving you fire and wanting to, giving you that determination to do something. At the same time, it might not be very clear about what you're doing or the impact that what you're doing is having on other people and in general, I would say. So like I said, then Venus stations, it's on the 23rd, and it will start that process in your sign. As Mars continues to move forward, Venus will stop and then start to move backwards. And it's moving back over this tricky juncture between your 1st and 12th sign over the next few months. It'll do it 3 times before it finally leaves in October. So it's a lot of kind of thinking about what you want and how you go about getting what you want and what you have to sacrifice to get what you want. That's essentially what this is about, I would say, with Venus. So, Leo, I hope that's a bit of help. I, as always, wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Virgo rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Virgo, your ruler Mercury moves through its own sign, Gemini, your 10th host sign, Virgo, which is all about work in the first part of July. And so this is a very powerful position for Mercury. It not only likes the sign, it likes the house. So the sign is Gemini, the house is the 10th house. So it's very much about career, objectives, any kind of planning around those will be important from here on out, because Mercury passes the sun from the 1st of the month. And on this this full moon you see here opposite Mercury in your 4th sign, there's a real culmination point, and then planning ahead and making some career moves, I would say. And anything you're planning at this time, of course, go ahead and do it, but also be mindful of other things that are going on. And there are a few things to consider here. One of those is Mars is moving into your 12th sign for July and August. And so Mars in your 12th sign could be, though there's something here that you really want, there's also something you have to let go of. Mars in the 12th sign is about being actively engaged in that letting go process without burning bridges, because Mars sometimes can be too gung-ho about things. And in the 12th sign, though it's about sacrifice, you might overdo that and you might kind of cut some things out, prematurely. And you don't want to do that, because Venus is about to move into this sign also, and will actually begin to station retrograde by the 23rd of July in your 12th sign, and then move backwards and go back into your 11th sign. So it's this back and forth between your 11th and 12th signs, and considering what it is that you want and what you need to give up to get what you want. So Mercury, your ruler, also moves into your 11th sign in Cancer by the 7th of July. And so that's the time to think about, what is it do you want anyway? What are you getting out from your career? What are you getting in terms of financially, for example, but also what are your objectives? What are your ambitions here? And how are you engaging with friends as well? That's another thing about the 11th sign. And because we also have a new moon here, which I'll show you now in just a moment, in your 11th sign, it's very much about how you're engaging with groups of people and friends, and what you want to get out of that relationship, and how you need to compromise all of these kinds of different things, as well as financially, because of the 2nd and 8th signs being very active right now as well. And again, going back to that 12th sign, it's very much about sacrifice and letting go and thinking about expenses as well. Like, for you to do something, sometimes you have to spend a bit to get something. And even if it's not money, it's like energy. You need time and energy you have to focus on something. And that's also especially indicated by Saturn's opposition to Venus and Mars in your 12th sign. It's here in your 6th sign retrograde. So it's asking you to really reconsider how you're approaching what you're doing every day to get to where you want to go, basically. So let me show you the new moon. It's on the 17th of July. It's at first degree, the very first degree of Cancer in your 11th sign, and it's opposing Pluto in a square to the nose in your 2nd and 8th. And so there's a lot of things financially that are coming to a head in a way, and a restart in a way as well. Now, the new moon itself is in a lunar mansion that is very much about coming back again, and thinking about repeating patterns and things like that. So thinking about that, Virgo, in terms of your financial setup, in any kind of way, in terms of relationships with your family, siblings, or, even, children, if you have any friends, all of these people, in-laws, all of these kinds of relationships are really impacted by all of these transits. And so you're going to have to think about how you're negotiating with all of these people, and how that impacts your own plans for the future and your own financial setup. So it's an important new moon for you, I would say, in that way, in terms of your plans. Again, Mars and Venus continue to your 11th or your 12th sign. But then by the 23rd, you can see here, Venus stations retrograde in your 12th sign. Venus is probably the only planet that does really well in the 12th sign, because it's very much about negotiating and compromising and doing things for others. And because Venus is your 2nd and 9th lord in the 12th, this could suggest, some, even, like I said, sacrifice in terms of spending, like more expense, but also reconsidering what you're spending your money on, of course, but also traveling. 9th lord in the 12th house, I would say, is more conducive to taking a long trip somewhere, going on a sabbatical, going on a, retreat, going somewhere to kind of allow this energy to play out as it will, without getting frustrated or impatient with this kind of transit, Venus-Mars, with Venus retrograde in your 12th sign. Because Mars in the 12th sign, it's just not obvious at all. You might just feel this vague sense of angst and you don't know where to put it. So try and put it into productive activities that are, again, allowing you to finish things up without burning bridges, is what I would say. I'm going to repeat what I said at the top of this, that it's a good time to finish things, but not overdo that impulse and then end up without. Don't cut things out of your life or people out of your life prematurely. Don't burn your bridges, essentially. So that is the month of July. It's quite an inspired month in many ways as well. So I think you need to just be inspired by, things that might not be obvious necessarily. There might be inspiration that you can, you can obtain in less obvious ways, in more hidden ways. And that tends to be reflected in a more spiritual path. But in whatever way it shows up for you, I think it can be a very inspired time, as long as you're willing to do the compromise. So Virgo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Libra rising and or moon sign for July 2023. So Libra, Venus, your ruler, is going to do some really quirky things in July and August and onwards. And it's important to be mindful of that from the outset, that Venus, as it moves through Cancer, the end degrees of Cancer into Leo, it's at this tricky juncture between water and fire, and it's volatile. And then it will slow down in Leo at 4 degrees and then station retrograde. And then eventually move back in August into Cancer again across this juncture, and then is combust, meets the sun. So Cancer, so Libra, pardon me, Cancer is your 10th whole sign. Leo is your 11th whole sign. This is very much about what you're doing and in general, your career objectives and what you would like to get out of what you're doing, the gains that you have from what you do. And so that usually means for most people, the earnings from the career, but it also could mean just any action that you take and what you want to gain from that. Because of course, Mars, your 7th lord, your 2nd lord, is in your 11th sign, Leo, moves in the beginning of the month. And this is, although volatile initially in the first few days of July, especially, is a very volatile period. It could settle out to be more kind of very determined and focused and, focused on getting something done. All of that's great. But again, adding to that, the Venus retrograde with Mars in your 11th whole sign, I think you need to be really mindful of the compromise that is necessary in your objectives right now. Any kind of dealings with anyone in terms of friendships, for example, or networks or associations of any kind, and with your employers or anything like that, and anyone at work, all of these things need to be really considered, and a lot of compromise is on the table here. So Mars in your 11th sign is also opposite Saturn in your 5th sign. So 5th and 11th are very much about relationships, including children and friends. Those are the two opposing, oftentimes, dynamics, because they literally are. 5th and 11th are opposite. So that means that, you might have to think about your, again, long-term objectives versus your immediate goals. 5th house, though it's about the future planning as well, as much as the 11th house, the 5th house is very much personal. And so that's why it represents things like children and lovers and things like that. So it's a very private, personal thing. Whereas the 11th house is like a network, a group, even a social, group, even society in general. So you're having to kind of balance these two areas of your life in July because of Mars and Saturn. And because Venus comes in and joins them, as we see here, a few days after the full moon, then you're really having to balance all of these things. You're socializing and also your, again, your career objectives and all of that, but socializing your objectives in life, your ambitions versus your more private home life, that your relationships at home, your children, the relationships and all of those things. And finding a balance for all of that might be a bit tricky. But if there's any sign, of course, as I always say, that can do that, and that's all about balance, is Libra, right? So it's just that with Venus, your ruler, about to stop moving forward in your 11th sign, whatever plans you have on the table are going to have to go into reverse for a while. You're going to have to rethink how you're approaching how you get what you want. And you possibly have to approach it in a different way at some point. You're going to have to compromise in some way, whether it's financially or any other which way, and thinking about how you're relating with your partner and how they're dealing with all of these compromises as well, because there's a lot here to negotiate with Venus retrograde. So that occurs after the new moon. I'm going to show you the new moon first. This is the new moon on the 17th. It's in your 10th whole sign. So the sun moves into your 10th sign on the 16th, 17th, it's the new moon. Sun and moon oppose Pluto in your 4th sign, squaring the nodes in your 1st and 7th. There's a lot that is pivoting on July. And I don't want to sound too dramatic or anything, but a lot is pivoting on this. The 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, it's all about your self, your home, your relationships, your career. The key pillars of your life are going through this change now. And it's not obvious change at all. And it hasn't been. The nodes have been moving through your first and seventh sign for over a year now. Pluto has been there since 2020. There's a lot of change going on in your personal life, in your home life, in your relationship. And how all of this is impacting your professional life is what's going to pan out in July, because the new moon, the sun and moon, and Mercury all gather in your 10th sign, with Venus eventually moving back to your 10th sign next month in August. So you're obviously really focusing for this new moon coming up from the 17th of July for the next month ahead, thinking about your career objectives and your professional life and anything that you're doing, any action at all that you're taking, and thinking about what needs to be compromised in getting what you want. That's a huge thing to consider for July. So as I said, a few days after the new moon, then we have your ruler Venus station retrograde in your 11th sign. And so it's a time obviously to slow down and pay attention. Retrograde planets are a time that we can maybe be all or nothing about things. We might overly focus on something. You might find yourself really focusing on some financial issue or some issue with some group or a group of friends or an objective that you have, an ambition that you have. You might be so focused on it, but you might lose perspective. And so it's important to think about your perspective here. And again, maybe going back to the drawing board and redoing something. And that especially happens once Venus goes back into Cancer in August. But because it's combust in August, I'll talk about it more next month, you're also maybe feeling a bit wiped. You might be feeling like, you're not really clear about how to go forward or what you should be doing. And so all of these things need balance, that you find a balance between your professional life and private life, yourself and your relationship, and have a space for all of these things, including your children and your creative endeavors and your future projections. All of these things are all sort of now balancing out, and we might say opposing as well, but another word we can use is balance. That things can be opposing, like you have this thing going on and then this thing going on, and they seem to be opposed, but at the same time you can find space for all of it and find a more balance in July. So that's the potential. Now the potential is there, and you can use it to your advantage, and to make sure that you're not getting frustrated with any kind of opposing force. If you get any kind of opposition at all in anything you're doing, planning, and any objective that you have, that you take a step back from it, I would say, in July, Libra. So I hope that's been of help, Libra. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Aries rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Aries, your ruler Mars, is finally out of its debilitation of Cancer. And although the first few days of July are bit of a volatile period, to say the least, that's because Mars is moving across this juncture between Cancer, the water sign, and Leo, the fire sign. So there's a lot of volatility that you have to deal with in the first few days of the month leading up to the full moon on the 3rd that I have up here. And all of the fiery signs are activated. Therefore, Aries, your 6th sign, Mars in your 10th sign, and the full moon in your 2nd sign. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius are all the fire signs. So it's definitely inspired in one way, and work is a key area or areas that you will find this kind of inspiration again. And Mars alone in your 10th sign is more inspired and determined and wants to take action. The issue here, of course, as with Mars always, is overdoing it, and overdoing it to the point where you create problems. Because Mars for you is always a problem in a way, Scorpio. It rules your sign, but it also rules your 6th sign. So that creates the problems. So as long as you're not seeing everything and everyone as like a threat, as like competition, that there's no competition really except for your own self. You're in competition with yourself, Scorpio. Then you don't have to get kind of caught up in these dynamics. Now, especially in the home, because Mars in your 10th house will also be opposing Saturn retrograde now in your 4th house. So any kind of relationship going on at home that might be strained, this is probably not the best time to tackle it. And I'm not saying to bury your head in the sand about it, but I'm just saying Mars opposite Saturn, 4th and 10th house, this is like potentially frustrating. So the best way to do this is actually to approach it with some project you're working on that you need to be very disciplined and focused on to get it done, and not to get too embroiled in sort of emotional sort of relationships that kind of could be volatile, especially with your mother, or any kind of relationships at home or any kind of home dynamics that are going on. Likely you're having to go through a lot of changes anyway at home, because Saturn is now retrograde in your 4th house for the first time. And so it was retrograde last year, but it really wasn't. It was just it was a preview. Now it's happening this summer and into the autumn. Saturn is going to make some big changes in your home life. And, Saturn tends to kind of constrict initially, at least before rebuilding. So considering that literally in terms of home life, maybe it's a time to downsize or clear out, do a good clear out while focusing on what you're doing in your work. And finding a balance between those two things then will be better than trying to work these out in your relationships, which, you could do, but other people have their own stuff going on. So I would say it's a better time to focus on these kinds of things. Getting your work-life balance right as well would be a key thing. And your relationship, that's another key thing that's happening, because a few days after this full moon on the 3rd, Venus will move into Leo, your 10th whole sign. And it's going to stay longer here, and it will go back into your 9th sign where it's been for the last few weeks because of its retrograde from July 23rd. This is important. So your relationship obviously is going to go through a lot of adjustment now. And you're yourself personally going through a lot of adjustments in terms of your work-life balance and all of that. Maybe changes happening in your work life and your home life, possibly. And so with Venus now in the mix and retrograding, then you're obviously going to have to compromise a lot with your partner. And this will be possibly also your partner having to compromise as well with you in terms of, you both of you and how you're going forward and how your career is moving forward. That's another key thing, because Mars is moving forward. This is the thing. Your ruler is moving forward through your 10th house, and you are moving forward and gung-ho about it regardless. But again, you just need to be mindful of the constraints of Saturn and thinking about the home situation, and that needs your time as well. And then now also thinking about Venus and it about to move retrograde in your 10th house, and all the compromise that you have to do and that you might not want to do. Let's put it that way. You might not want to compromise, but you're going to have to. So let me show you the new moon on the 17th. So the new moon is on the 17th, the day after the sun moves into your 9th sign. The 9th sign, just as Venus previous, and Venus will again return to in August, is, an enjoyable in many ways sign. It's enjoyable in a way that's more meaningful. And Venus in the 9th sign can be very enjoyable and meaningful. The sun and moon and Mercury also moving through your 9th sign, and this new moon on the 17th is a time to think more meaningful, though, to think more inspirational, to think about things that are maybe a repeating pattern here, because this lunar mansion Purnavasu is all about something that's repeating in your life. You might be returning to something here, whether it's studies or travel. Like, for example, a lot of people travel and they go to the same place. They like to go back to that same place, that kind of thing, anything, or you might even just do that in your imagination. Whatever it is, there's a repeating pattern, something to look back on, something then to also, though, instigate for this new lunar month ahead. So from the 17th of July, the thing is that sun and moon are opposite Pluto in your 3rd sign, in a square to Rahu Ketu in your 6th and 12th sign. And all of these dynamics are all hidden in the past. 3rd, 6th, 9th, 12th are all the past houses. And so it's all about the past conditioning and how you could look at that for this new moon, I would say, because this lunar mansion is all about patterns. So possibly looking at your past conditioning, looking at the patterns and how you could break free from those patterns and create new patterns and new thoughts and new beliefs and maybe new travels, new studies, new ways of thinking about things. And that will be important because, like I said, Venus will subsequently then move back into your 9th sign and thinking about how you connect with those things and with your partner or with any other, and connecting more deeply with that and enjoying that process as well. And not getting overly focused on the 6th house thing, because the 6th house has been so active in your chart for so long, and it's aspecting the full moon, and it's aspecting your ruler Mars now in Leo. Rahu and Jupiter both aspect Mars and Leo. So there's a great impetus to kind of make something work now. But again, if you don't have that kind of meaningful purpose behind it all, which is what the 9th sign is about, then it just might feel like drudgery. But if instead you actually feel very purposeful about breaking some patterns and creating new ones and meaningful patterns in your life, then this can be very rewarding, I would say, Scorpio. I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Sagittarius, Jupiter, your ruler, is beginning to break apart with Rahu. And, you would have felt this in the last few weeks, especially with their exact conjunction at the beginning of June. But by the beginning of July, Jupiter has got far enough away from Rahu to be less uncertain, to kind of like allow the fog of uncertainty to clear and more clarity to come in here, because the fifth sign is very much about being clear about the future and planning your future. So Jupiter in your fifth sign is seen to be, very positive place, if not the most positive place. It's aspecting your ninth sign and your first sign, as well as your 11th opposite. So this is a very purposeful, very deliberate position. Now, added to that, Mars is about to move into your ninth sign, aspected by Jupiter. And so that's even more purposeful. So you might sense this need to kind of really forge ahead here. And all of that's great, but you also need to be mindful of Saturn opposing Mars. And that's another key configuration in July that we all have to be mindful of. And this kind of sense of, planning ahead or doing something or achieving something and being very determined in anything we're doing with Mars, but then being constrained or restricted or just sensing the consequence of our actions with Saturn, and how we have to rethink our approaches. That's Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. So for you, Sagittarius, it's very much about travel and thinking and planning and learning and engaging and communicating with other people. And how you can manage all of these is obviously to find a balance between all of it, to travel about, to kind of think about, any kind of long-term plans here, to think about your, long-term travel as well as your short-term, more immediate travel, like short travels is the third house. But again, communicating anything meaningful. Third house is not so much meaningful as just playful. The ninth house is more meaningful. So Mars in your ninth house now, ruler of your fifth house with Jupiter there, aspecting, looking for something more meaningful and engaging in your life, I would say. And all of this can be very inspiring, I would say. And especially now starting out the month, as volatile as it is, with a full moon in your sign in Sagittarius. So all the fiery signs are really activated now. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, your rising sign or your moon sign. And so it's going to be very inspired, I would say, this first part. Now, there are obviously a lot of caveats there in terms of what's happening later on in the month, including especially the Venus retrograde, which begins the month in your eighth sign. It's been moving through your eighth sign, where Mars has also moved through. So it's positive that Mars is now out of your eighth sign, and Venus, a few days after this full moon, is also out of your eighth sign, moving into your ninth sign. Also very positive. Ninth sign Venus is even more positive in terms of enjoying travels, enjoying, culture and enjoying higher minded things. It's not just about meaning now, it's also about just enjoying those things. The thing is so Mars is going to move forward and continue to do so, but Venus is not. Venus is about to station retrograde by July 23rd. So a few days after the new moon on July 17th, which I'll get to now, Venus stationing retrograde in your ninth house, moving back to your eighth house eventually in August, and also will go into combustion in August. There's a lot to kind of think and rethink and compromise around here. And the ninth sign, again, like I said, is travel, but it's studies also. And going back into your eighth sign eventually, thinking about the financial setup here. And because the new moon is in your eighth sign, which I'll show you now, it's on the 17th. New moon on the 17th, after the sun has just moved into Cancer, your eighth sign, opposing Pluto in your second sign, squaring the nose in your fifth and 11th. You're really having to consider a lot to do with your finances here, but also relations, family dynamics and relationships and all of that, your children and friends, or your creative endeavors, plans for the future, and your higher goals, your objectives in life. Thinking about all of those things, of course, but especially the eighth house now, new moon opposing Pluto, you're going to have to really consider the unforeseeable circumstances, maybe kind of plan for that sort of rainy day, as people say. And so a new moon in your eighth sign is a time to kind of be open to the unexpected, and to not just expect the unexpected is bad, to expect something good unexpected as well. This lunar month and this lunar sign that is instigated on the 17th is very much about repeating patterns and maybe observing those patterns in yourself, like deep psychological hidden patterns that can come to the fore now with this new moon opposite Pluto in your second sign. So maybe speaking about them with a therapist or, you know, even a friend, just having it out with someone to kind of just get to grips with some of these patterns, these dynamics would be really helpful and useful in terms of, again, planning ahead. All of these houses, second, fifth, 8th, and 11th, they're all about your future and planning for your future. So this period is a real, I'm not exaggerating, it's a real pivotal time in planning your future, this month of July, with, again, the nodes and Pluto, Sun, Moon, all coming into a square opposition. All of that is kind of like hinging on this month in a way. So making those plans for this new moon on the 17th would be important. Now, like I said, though, a few days after, Venus will start to retrograde from the 23rd. So I just, you know, highlight that this needs to be, you know, obviously considered, that you have to consider what you're doing in your day-to-day life, in anything you want to do, in any kind of bigger picture, plan, ambition, goal that you have in life. You have to obviously set it in place. You have to have some steps. That's what it means to have the sixth lord and ruling the 11th house also. And it's Venus. And because it's doing it in your ninth house, it's about, again, planning something more meaningful and purposeful for yourself. And you just have to be mindful of, as is the case for everybody, you know, the financial situation, because Venus generally represents that anyway. But because it rules your 11th sign, especially, it's very much about earnings. So a lot of changes and adjustments that have to be made here while you're going through these very personal changes and plans for the future. You know, think about it in a positive way. I would say that these plans could be really positive for you ultimately. But you just do have to stay open to the unexpected. Again, especially as Venus then goes back into your 8th house in August and is combust, because you can see here the sun is now moving into Cancer mid-month. Mercury is here. It's going to go into Leo then. All of these planets are going back over in this juncture between Cancer and Leo, your 8th and 9th sign. There's a lot to work out here and a lot of unexpected twists and turns that you have to negotiate and be very compromising on, I would say. So, Sagittarius, I hope that has been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Capricorn rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Capricorn, Saturn, your ruler, is now settled into its groove in its retrograde in Aquarius, your second whole sign. So this is very much about finances, family dynamics, values. And because Venus is about to move into opposition where Mars has already moved into in your 8th sign and will retrograde later on in the month of July with Mars moving on, you can see there's a lot hinging here on family dynamics and relationships and finances in terms of you sorting things out with your partner or someone other or family and all of that. So thinking about values, thinking about your values versus other people's values, and how you can negotiate here, because Venus retrograding at the end of the month for the next few weeks, there's a lot of compromise that is needed, a lot of negotiation that's required here. And Venus will return to your 7th sign where it begins the month, of course, and will actually ask you to do that, you know, to really compromise in your relations. And of course, a lot pivoting on the 4th house as well. And, you know, the 4th house and all the key players really in your chart, the 4 pillars of your chart, really, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. There's so much action going on in July, and it's such a pivotal month in many ways that your main areas of your life are going through such change. And you're going to have to negotiate a lot with these. So the 1st is yourself, the 4th, your home, 7th, your relationships, and 10th, your career. So the 4th house, of course, is having an inordinate amount of focus because of Jupiter, Rahu, Uranus, and now Mars moving into a trine has an aspect from Rahu and Uranus. You can see here on the 3rd of July is the full moon in Sagittarius. So all the fire signs, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, are all activated in a very inspiring way in many ways, but it's also inspiring you to make changes. And there are lots of changes, like I said, personally, professionally, in your relationships, in every which way, and especially in your home, because the 4th lord now is in the 8th house, Mars. Mars as the 4th lord and the 11th lord, and your ambitions in terms of being happy and settled in home, is going through changes in Leo for the next couple of months. So Mars and Leo in your 8th sign is showing that there is some changes in your home life, and that is going to add to your personal changes that you're going through. So let me just bring it forward, and I'll show you the new moon on the 17th. Let me bring it back to your rising sign. So here's the new moon at the 1st degree of Cancer in your 7th sign. So it's again, another key focal point is your relationships. And so a new moon in your 7th sign, opposite Pluto in your 1st sign, squaring the nodes in your 4th and 10th signs, is very much about a pivot and thinking about how you can change the pattern, change the record, as they say. This is like a repeating pattern. This is a new moon in Punarvasu, lunar mansion in Cancer, in your 7th sign of relationship. And so there's something that has to alter here, and you have to subsequently make some adjustments here because of Venus going back into Cancer in August. But this is the time it's instigated on the new moon on the 17th. A few days after this is Venus stationing retrograde on the 23rd in your 8th sign, beginning there and going back to your 7th, where the sun is moved in by mid-July. So a lot of emphasis on 8th sign, yes, but going back into your 7th sign, but the sun highlighting that area. So relationships are going to be key. And again, all of that impacting your home life and also friendships, but also, or your career, but also yourself, because ultimately all of this hinges on the changes that are happening within yourself, Capricorn, the Pluto changes that continue to not necessarily manifest, obviously, but there's deep inner changes that are going on. And this month in July, with a new moon in your 7th sign, you know, it might bring up some more obvious changes, and it might be through somebody else. That's one of the things. If I go back to this new moon, I think that is potential. So the new moon on the 17th or around then, it might be that somebody else reflects back to you the changes that you are going through that you haven't actually been able to see in yourself. And so this is one possible expression of that. So Capricorn, I hope that's been of help. I, as always, wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, for Aquarius rising and our moon sign for July 2023. So Aquarius, Saturn is now getting into its groove, its retrograde groove in your sign. And so it's all about reassessing and ending something as your 12th Lord in your first sign. So possibly going back over something and finishing something out finally for once and for all. And that might have felt delayed recently in the last few weeks because Saturn didn't appear to move at all in June. So in July, at least there's this kind of going back and doing it and finalizing it and finishing it, and at least starting that process. Your other ruler, Rahu, of course, which always goes backwards, even though it's very future orientated, which is always one of the quirks about Rahu and your sign Aquarius. Rahu is all about the future, but it's always moving back. And so it's always asking us to look back at what we're achieving, what we're going forward doing, and how that is impacting us. And so that's the dual rulership of Rahu and Saturn on your sign. You're always having to think about the consequences of what you're doing. And so this is especially, you know, important here now because Saturn in your sign aspecting your 3rd sign where Rahu is placed. So thinking about what you want to do, thinking about what you have to do, thinking about what you have to finish. I would say those are the key points to make here, Aquarius. Jupiter and Rahu are breaking up finally, and so there might be some more clarity coming forward. Jupiter in the 3rd sign, you know, it's about having to fight for something as well, where you might not feel like it. You might not feel the impetus or the, you know, the energy to kind of complete something. And that was especially more so the case, though, in recent weeks because Mars, your 3rd ruler, was debilitated in Cancer. But now in July, Mars is moving into Leo in a much more fiery, determined, focused stance. Mars in your 7th sign, opposite Saturn in your 1st sign. This is a lot more inspired, I would say. Engaging with other people might inspire you more. You might get creative. It might be a very inspiring and creative month for you, Aquarius. This is the full moon on the 3rd I have highlighted here. So the full moon is in another fire sign, Sagittarius. So all the fire signs are really stoked now, really charged. So Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, and it's very much about engaging and being creative and expressing yourself and doing that with other people and getting involved in some group dynamic, especially around the 3rd of July. I would imagine that's a very social, outgoing time. It could be potentially if you're in the mood. But of course, that's what the moon reflects. It reflects our moods. So this full moon in your 11th sign of social life, meeting with friends, engaging, all of that could be really fun and also, remember, inspiring. So that's all very positive. The one thing to note, though, of course, is that Venus, which after the full moon, a few days after, on the or a few days, sorry, after the new moon, which I'm going to go through here, is going to station retrograde. So this is where, there's a lot to kind of, despite this inspiration and gung-ho energy and moving forward with Mars and all of the fieriness going on in July, there is this need to compromise. There's a lot of compromise. So this is the Venus retrograde from July 23rd. It's starting in your 7th sign. So this obviously means that you're going to have to really think about your relationship and relationships in general. And you might have to really compromise and review how you're relating and your relationship in general. And so as it begins here in your 7th sign, it will go back into your 6th sign in August and will be combust the sun, which has just moved into your 6th sign by mid-July. This means that you're obviously going to have to go back to the drawing board in many ways and work out what's not working out. So if there's any problems in your relationship, this is the time to tackle them. Venus retrograde from your 7th back to your 6th house is the perfect time to deal with any problems at home, to deal with any problems in terms of your relationship, to work things out. It doesn't mean it's the best time to actually have it all sorted from get-go, but you can figure it all out through the process and get clear about it and work out some kinks. And if there are problems in your relationship, you can work them out. Let me go back to the new moon, though. That's on the 17th. It is in your 6th sign, where Venus will return in August. The sun moves in by mid-July. The new moon at the 1st degree of Cancer, your 6th sign, is about, well, how do you go about dealing with your everyday life? You've got a lot of things that are inspiring you now, Aquarius, but you're going to have to obviously set a plan in place, have some sort of plan to do things on a daily basis, to do what you need to do. To be more creative, you have to actually be more organized in your day-to-day life. And because Venus, like I said, is going to retrograde and go back into this sign and really get you to focus on the problems of your day-to-day life and what's not working. And it might obviously show problems in your home life as well, because Venus is your 4th lord. So you might have to deal with problems at home while you're working these things out. There's some obstacles to overcome here. But again, it's just about tackling with them now, dealing with all the problems, and even enjoying the process. This is the thing. You could even enjoy this process of Venus in your 6th sign. And, especially if it's a work problem, if you are someone who works with other people, it could be an enjoyable process of figuring things out with other people. So Aquarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Pisces rising and or moon sign for July 2023, Pisces, your ruler Jupiter, is slowly breaking apart from Rahu in July. In June, they were very much intertwined. A lot of confusion there, perhaps a lot of lack of clarity potentially, but now they're actually moving apart. At least some clarity can be forthcoming. And the second sign is all about vision anyway. It's not just outer vision, but inner vision, a sense of clarity about your vision, and especially around work and who you are and what you're doing and how you need to go about that and the resources that are needed to achieve those goals. Thinking about your 2nd house in terms of finances, for example, resources, family dynamics, your sense of value and self-worth as well, your own sense of worth in what you're doing. This is all a really important indication for Jupiter for actually many months to come until next April 2024. So I definitely think there's a sense of, gaining more clarity is possible in July. Sun is moving through your 4th whole sign for the first couple of weeks and then into your 5th, where there's going to be a lot of attention on your 5th sign into your 6th sign with Venus and Mars from your 5th into your 6th and Venus going back into your 5th from your 6th. So it's this back and forth between the 5th and 6th with Venus because it's going to slow down and station retrograde in your 6th sign. So there's definitely a lot of sort of back and forth going on in terms of your plans, in terms of what you need to do in your everyday life. Mars, you can see here, has already moved in by the full moon on the 3rd. It's getting settled into Leo. And so there's a very fiery combination going on here now in your 2nd, 6th, and 10th, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, all these planets and the full moon. It's potentially more inspired action and work can be feeling that energy, but it does require restraint because Saturn is opposite Mars. And Saturn opposite Mars from your 6th and 12th, it means that you're having to, you know, do what you can and remove what needs to be removed, while also ending something, letting go of something as well, and sacrificing something maybe even. And that's Saturn retrograde in your 12th. So whatever it is that you feel like doing and would love to do and feel inspired to do, and or feel you need to do, it's like you have to do this every day. You have to just show up and do this. That's 6th house. If you're not kind of kicking back and allowing yourself to recharge, which is 12th house, you know, you might not be as effective in doing it. So this is an important consideration here in terms of your energy levels in July, that you don't overdo anything, that you don't push too hard, when really it's asking you to be very, very deliberate and work at it and chip away at it every day, and give yourself that rest and recuperation, and let go of things at points as well when you don't feel like it's working out, especially around the 21st of July, when Mars and Saturn come in exact opposition. And at that time as well, Venus will station retrograde, which I'll show you now. So first, before we do that, though, I want to show you the new moon on the 17th. So the sun moves into Cancer on the 16th, and then the day after, the moon joins it on the 17th. We have a new moon in Cancer. 5th sign, it's all about what you would love to do, planning your future, whether it's engaging with your children or planning their future, or your own and your own creative self, you know, expressive, whatever you've got going on. It's very much about what you would love to do. And because Venus is going to return here as well in August, combust the sun, it won't be visible. Really thinking long and hard about these things. What is it that you would love to do? Whatever about what you have to do, thinking about what you would love to do. Because if you don't love it, it would be kind of a bit of a drudgery. Let's face it, the 6th house can become a bit of like a stick in the mud sort of thing, especially with Mars opposite Saturn. So thinking about the 5th sign is important in terms of keeping that fuel going, that fire, that kind of inspiration, and that love for that thing, whoever that is, or whatever that is, whatever you're doing. So this new moon on the 17th is an important time to think about these things, to think about maybe doing something that you used to do as well. This lunar mansion, Purnarvasu, is very much about returning to something. So maybe there was something that you used to love doing and you don't do anymore, or maybe thinking about doing that, maybe revisiting that. But anything that you do, thinking about what do you love to do, and then you'll find it much easier to just stick with what you have to do then in the 6th house. Because then, like I said, Venus will station retrograde by the 23rd. So this is a bit more of a kind of stuck in the mud in a way, but at the same time, it can be, you know, enjoyable, especially as Venus goes back into your 5th sign. In your 6th sign, it's less enjoyable perhaps, but you could enjoy the humdrum. You could enjoy the everyday stuff, the drudgery of it. That's potential. Like if you work with other people, especially, this could smooth out any kind of relations at the work, because 6th house Mars could certainly create some tensions in your work life. But if with Venus now, you just negotiate more and you compromise more, everything can get smoothed out. And then subsequently, as Venus goes back into Cancer in August, then you'll be able to start to enjoy those things and really reconnect as well with the things that you love to do. Whatever about anyone else thinks, that's the thing with Venus for you. So you have to do what you love. Yeah, other people have their own things that they value and they want out of you. But you have to think about what you want, not just what you have to do, but what you want to do. So Pisces, that is the month of July. It's definitely an inspired time in many ways, but it's a time we need to be really patient. And I hope you found that useful. I hope it's helped. And as always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time.